Tom Brokaw wrote in his 1998 book, The Greatest Generation, the following. When the United States entered World War II, the U.S. government turned to ordinary Americans and asked of them extraordinary service, sacrifice, and heroics. Many Americans met those high expectations and then returned home to lead ordinary lives. Even though they returned home to lead ordinary lives, these men and women were nothing but ordinary. They were the extraordinary. They were the givers and those who sacrificed everything. Today we pay tribute to these men and women as we honor their service and as we tell their stories. As Americans, we are free because of these men and women. Therefore, their story leads to our story, a story of freedom. To understand why they went, we have to understand who they were and how many there were. According to the History Channel website, World War II was the most widespread and deadliest war in history. It involved more than 30 different countries, resulting in 50 million military and civilian deaths. The mission of these men and women was to stop Hitler after he had invaded Poland in 1939. And for 6 long years, the Allied forces would fight evil until there was peace on the global front, until Hitler had been annihilated and the Nazi soldiers would pay for the atrocities that they had done. But it wasn't done without bloodshed and death. Conquering evil would require personal sacrifice. General George S. Patton once stated, "A man must know his destiny. If he does not recognize it, then he is lost." By this I mean once, twice, or at the very most 3 times, fate will reach out and tap a man on the shoulder. If he has the imagination, he will turn around and will point out to him what fork in the road he should take. If he has the guts, he'll take it. My personal connection is filled with men who came to that fork in the road, and they took it and they made that decision. 4 of those I want to talk about today. The first in my family was Paul Forbes. Paul was my grandfather, my dad's dad. Today in my living room I have a memorial to him with a picture of him as a young man and some medals that he earned overseas during World War II. Papa and his brother Blaine both decided to enlist because times were tough in their little mountain town after the Great Depression. One of my uncles once stated that many of those soldiers became soldiers instead of farmhands because they were hungry, because the Great Depression had annihilated their little mountain town and it was hard to recover. And at least if you joined the military, you got 3 meals a day and a brand new pair of boots. And they hadn't seen boots in a long time, or 3 meals. But for them, they joined. Papa was sent from this little mountain town overseas into a world he'd never known. He saw devastation and he saw beauty. In one of his funniest stories, he had met up with his brother Blaine. They were in different units, but they were able to see each other. And as they saw each other in this town, they also came across some other units. And there were GIs laughing and joking and something going on as they were all in a circle together. So Papa and Blaine went over to see what it was. Imagine their surprise when they saw several other men from their little mountain town who had been assigned to another unit. They're over in Belgium, and this little tiny town in North Carolina had multiple men out of all the thousands and thousands of men there who knew each other. Papa used to laugh that the funniest part about that story was that those boys from that mountain town were trading cigarettes and selling cigarettes to the other GI because they had been in a place that had cigarettes and the other ones hadn't had one in a very long time. His brother Blaine went with him, and they were in different places. But in one of the most tragic stories of our family, their younger brother Harley decided to enlist. See, Harley was only 17, but both of his older brothers that he looked up to was in the military, and they were overseas, and he wanted to go too. In those days, you didn't always have a birth certificate, and so when Harley went to enlist, he lied about his age and told them he was really 18. Harley was the only one who didn't return home. Harley was killed while crossing the Rhine River. The Nazis had finally been taken captive. The Jews had been freed, and part of Harley's task was to bring some of those Nazi soldiers across the Rhine River in Germany, where they would face prosecution and jail for the atrocities toward the Jews. While crossing, they came under fire from the Nazis, and the boat that he was on sank. Harley drowned in the Rhine River. They sent his body from Germany to a military cemetery in Margarten, Holland. One of the pictures I have of my Papa Paul is of him standing over that grave when he got leave to go to Holland to visit his brother's grave. Years later, when the war was over, my great-grandmother would receive a telegram from the office of the Army instructing her that she could now bring her son home. They exhumed his body at that cemetery in Holland, sent him by plane into Atlanta, Georgia. From Atlanta, Georgia, he went on a train into our little mountain community, and there he was delivered to the local funeral home, who arranged for a graveside service. Harley's body now lays beside his mother and father in a grave in the mountains of North Carolina. While Papa Paul had many stories, some of them sad and some of them funny, my other grandfather, Papa Cecil, didn't have so many great stories. Papa didn't talk about the war. When he did talk about the war, he was generally drinking. The war was tough on him. He had been in a bunker. They came under artillery fire. Papa was deafened in one ear from that fire. But greater than that, he watched one of his best friends die in that manhole beside him. Papa didn't talk about the war much. It was after his death that I was doing some research as part of genealogy and realized he had been given the Purple Heart. He never said a word about it. He didn't want the Purple Heart. I think in his heart he really wanted his friend back. Their stories are more than medals in frames that I hang on a living room wall, and it's more than a memorial or a plaque in some town or state. So where does your story connect with the story of the greatest generation, and what can we learn from them? As our World War II veterans age, pay close attention, and if you see a veteran, thank them for their service. Help with a flight of honor so those Americans who remain alive and served during that time can go visit their World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. My grandmother's brother Ralph was able to go overseas, and many years later he was able to go to the Korean War monument as part of the flight of honor, where they flew them there and gave them a tour of the memorials and the monuments that had been erected toward their service. Visit the memorial yourself. We took our kids several years ago to Washington, D.C., and it was neat to stand in that hallowed spot and respect and honor those men and women who had given their life and given so much. If you can't physically visit D.C., visit the National World War II Memorial and view the names on that website of those who served and some of their stories. Find a way to pay respect to these people. On Memorial Day, in the midst of the cookout and the fun and the swimming as we kick off the beginning of summer, remember the sacrifices that make us free and give us those liberties to have fun. Most of all, be prepared and willing to face that fork in the road that General Patton talked about, and be ready. Have the guts, and when that opportunity comes, take it. Let's all be a part of the next greatest generation that will raise our children and grandchildren to be proud of us.